Hi everyone, welcome to my video on the Vienna Imperial piano virtual instrument by Vienna Symphonic Library. They're a very well-known company for making great samples within the orchestral and other worlds as well. I use a lot of their jazz-based stuff. Their upright bass and jazz kit are pretty excellent. This piano library, it's been out for a long time. I haven't done enough research. It came roughly 10 years ago. And I've, dare I say, lusted after it for a while. I think it was always deemed, or is still kind of deemed, as one of the best libraries around. And some of that is just due to stats. I mean, there's up to 100 velocity layers per note. I think there's 1,200 samples per note. I don't really mind too much about that. It's more that I want to hear how it plays today. But you know, the stats on paper sound great. Now, there's not many other instruments that have, I don't think there's any other piano VSTs that have that many velocity layers, at least. But anyway, it's been around for a while. There's other libraries out there now that do, great things. I want to do another video after this comparing it to some other libraries. But first I thought we'd just get a little look at how it works. I wanted to come into this not really planning too much. I kind of feel a lot of these things are like, here's a great, piece of me playing some virtuoso piano stuff, and it sounds good because I'm a good player, which is wonderful. Thanks to those guys who are wonderful players. I play a bit. I'm not going to profess to be the best piano player in the world. I can get around, and I'm mainly playing as a producer and occasionally for live stuff where I play a lot of keyboard stuff, a lot of synthy sort of stuff. Anyway, let's first look at this GUI here. One of the things that I'd love an update for at some point would be if I could expand the size of this GUI, just because, I'm kind of spoiled. FabFilter, I can get this massive screen version, full screen versions. I just want something like that so I can see it, but I don't have to lean into the screen. But anyway, if you've used Vienna stuff before, you'll see that it comes in its own separate player. Other instruments within the Vienna line, come in the Vienna instruments player, and you do things via that. This has its own player, own GUI, and it's pretty good. One thing you'll quickly notice, and I'm presuming this is because there's so much sample material there, that to load the program does take a couple of seconds, which is slower than some. Contact can take a little while to load their things, but once you're in, you're in. Whereas whenever you change between the mic positions with this, you have to wait each time. There's also, you can note from that you can only use one at a time. Anyway, let me just play a few notes and then we can see. Anyway, it sounds really nice. There's no doubting that. Some of this is always going to be personal preference when you come to ordering these things. You have to like the Bosendorfer. I don't know how to say that word. I'm sure somebody can correct me. I'm going to go with Bosendorfer. But, you have to like that sound to like this piano. If you're, going into this and thinking, oh, I really want this, but I want the sound of a Steinway. A Steinway sample set is going to sound better, for you. And there's plenty of great ones out there. Ivory. The American Ivory is another one I'd love to have at some point in the year. Steinway is great. But yeah, I'm not a huge Bosendorfer fan, but this is the one that changes my mind. I think it's got a lovely tone. Sometimes the Bosendorfers have a bit too, I don't know, it's like a nasal character or coldness to them, but this does not. It sounds a little bit more alive. Anyway, so that's the close. Let me just quickly mess through these. The player position, which I quite like. From an EQ point, I want to EQ the mids a bit on this. You can see on the FabFilter, it kind of holds onto that 500 area a bit too much for my liking, but it sounds pretty nice. The distant one, I'm not a huge fan of, if I'm honest. I guess it's always going to be dependent on taste here. But it sounds for a distant piano sounds quite thin to me, but I imagine would blend quite well with orchestral stuff. If I go into the advanced page, we get a few more things here. So we get this EQ, which is fine. I think from twisting around with it a bit, it's quite versatile. I would probably use my own EQ. There's MIDI sensitivity, which I don't know what it does. Yeah, okay, so it holds onto plates. Okay, yeah, everything is the same velocity now, which I guess if you're doing really heavy stuff for dance or something like that, I'm going to go back to the close, because I think that's going to sound better. That was really 90s rave of me. I don't want to be encouraging such things, but you get the idea. I don't know if you've noticed on the screen here, these black notes at the bottom. This is because the actual Bosendorfer 290, the real life one, has some notes below the bottom A, and it allows us to do that, I presume. So there we go. So we actually get the real all the way down to that somewhat unusable but lovely C minus something. I guess for certain soundtracky things you might think that sounds very Terminator 1 to me. I'm sure they used that at some point. But yeah, if you want to use that, there it is. Or if you've got a smaller MIDI keyboard, I mean, I'm lucky to have this nice Studio Logic 88 thing here. But if you want to, you know, if you've got a smaller keyboard and you need to move octaves, you can do it within the player itself. And fine tuning, I guess, for those who don't want to play superstition in the key that you've been asked, that's there for you as well. So there is this nice set of reverbs. Actually, I do quite like these. You know, there are other reverb plugins that I potentially would use above this, but to get an idea of sound, I mean, there's a shame with this is you can't adjust the reverb too much, but it does does nice things. Large hall. I'll flick through some of these quickly. Usable, right? Like they're manageable. I quite like the small hall actually. That's my first one that has made me go, oh, I'll definitely use that for stuff. I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but if I move the dynamic range a little for some kind of really soft. Yeah, nice. Finally, Mozart. So. A bit of a mids push there that I don't necessarily like, but we'll come to that. Great. For now, let's get rid of that reverb and we look into the sympathetic. So this is basically the sympathetic, can't say that word, sympathetic resonance of the piano. So for instance, if I hold down, I don't know, let's go for these Ds down here, and I play, there's going to be some resonance going down on the bottom there. Whereas if I take it Die. There's some resonances going down, and it's quite nice for some really, if you want to make a very vibey, rich sound. That sounds really nice. You can really feel like you're in front of a big piano that's resonating with itself. Or if you want something really clean and you don't want so much, I guess I would say width, but if you don't want so much vibiness or blurriness within the sound, then you can turn it all the way down, and you kind of, yeah, it's slightly cleaner. I think somewhere just above, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing it for soundtracky stuff and you want to have as much vibrance, then that's going to be the thing to do. Pedal noise is literally the noise of the sustain pedal. So if I'll turn my mic off for a second. So record that on its own and use it as a percussion instrument. I recommend it. These sort of things sound good. Let's turn that down, and then finally stereo width, which I think is a really useful thing to have for pianos. A lot of the time I find, unless you've got a solo piano line, or even if, like, you know, you can get away with it with piano and singer-songwriter stuff, I find a very wide piano is actually quite difficult to manage in a mix, especially if you're mixing with pop or something a bit soundtracky or a bit more involved, like instruments-wise. Then having the ability to have stuff in mono, while not the most exciting thing in the world, it just gives you that flexibility. I mean, that is not necessarily what you want. I'm presuming this is a mix down to mono rather than recorded in mono. Some piano libraries do record in mono, as I think Piano in Blue, which I'm going to show in the comparison at some point, has actual mono recordings, which sound gorgeous actually, and it's really handy for doing oldie jazz sort of style things. But if I go back to full wide, that's really quite at the extremes, which is, I say, a pain in the arse if you're trying to mix stuff and you want the bass to sit in the center of the spectrum. Then it's not the ideal thing to have it so wide. So if we push it to about 40 to 50%, much more manageable, I think. Okay, next thing I want to go to is the key editor. Now, as you might already see, that I have adjusted some of this already. When I first played this yesterday, I noticed there were all sorts of weird things going on in the mid-range. I say weird things. This happens with most piano libraries. Every time I put something down for professional work, I end up having to sit there with a fab filter and kind of pull out some weird frequencies that pop out on certain notes. And as you can see, I've gone through, and it just as I've been noodling around, basically noticing where some of these points are. And whilst it's annoying that I have to do that, you can EQ each note individually and then save that as your preset. I wish all piano sample libraries had this feature. It does make a huge difference. I mean, it's one of those things it may not bother you. You may want that kind of realistic pings of certain notes. I just find them a mixing a job that I have to do down the road. So I mean, I don't know if you'll notice this. So if I go to the A, so that's with my EQ in off, or on should I say, and then you may not hear it if you're listening through laptop or phone speakers or something like that, but on the headphones, and you can even see it on the fab filter far corner, there's that little resonance poking up over there. So yeah, the ability to move those things down, this G spell especially had. Oh yeah, that F sharp, look at it. Somewhere in that register over there. Anyway, the good thing is it allows me to go through and pick off those harmonics, and they never have to be heard again. Whether it takes off some of the shine from the piano in general, I don't know enough yet. I can notice there's obviously slight, ever such a slight dullness, but I think that as a compromise is good. I'd rather do that than sit through and ping out, EQing out loads of resonant frequencies that I don't want. Again, why that's not been solved in the making of this. I presume that it was just recorded as it was, and that's how they wanted purest recordings they could get. So that's probably why it's not been edited. Also within this page, we can also edit the note volume. So if you're finding, I did a lot of research, going in between, figuring out which library I wanted to go for, and did a lot of research on this one again because I knew it had been something I'd been thinking about, especially as it was on sale. But I've heard some people say that the dynamic range is differ between notes and note volume. I haven't noticed that yet, but I'm not quite as susceptible as somebody might be who's a professional classical pianist or such and such. But if you wanted to, you could. If you noticed suddenly that your low B flat was quieter than the others, just turn it up. I mean, yeah, it was surprising to me how quickly I got to edit the resonant frequencies out of it. And if I had more ear for dynamics, potentially I would be doing the same thing for volumes as well, and potentially I will do at some point. Obviously, with it, you can change the dynamic range within that as well. The global dynamic range, I would guess, is if you want to save that as a preset somehow. Works very similarly to the MIDI dynamic range, the MIDI sensitivity on the other window. And there's a global MIDI sensitivity, which sounds weird to me. Anyway, those are things you can play with as well. And it looks like, I guess you can copy. So if you want to copy your settings from this C to the C above, you just go copy, paste, and then that would do the same thing. I'm going to turn that off so I'm double clicking. Wonderful. And actually this EQ is quite handy to use as well. You can obviously move things around quite easily, and then if you hold down Control, you can mess with the cues. You don't have to fiddle too much with these numbers up here. You can just do it by eye and ear. So in this top right hand corner, we've got a load samples thing, and this just basically defines how much you're loading into RAM each time you're loading up one of the mic positions. So you can omit the soft pedals, omit the release samples, and or both. I presume I haven't got a soft pedal set up, and that's something I want to try at some point. It definitely takes less time to obviously load. And I guess if your computer struggles and you're finding everything's very slow, you could always just load those, and then when it comes to bouncing things down or recording down, you can load up the full version. Optimize does also some things, so learning use samples and optimize load. I'm not going to go into that because I don't know all the details, but I'm presuming that the learn use samples would be taking learning what you've used in the last bit of time and only loading up those. And I guess that would, if you're going through and you're not thinking about the playing side, you're just thinking about the editing side, then it's really handy for that sort of thing. So over on the left we've got some presets here, which I've gone through a few of these. I don't necessarily like many of them, but I'll just show a few of them now. Again, the loading thing could drive some people mad. It's irked me, but I think I would get used to it. So the difficulty with these things is I don't know yet, and I'm very happy for people to tell me otherwise, that it doesn't save my EQ settings on per note, because I can already hear can hear some frequencies that are poking out that I don't want to hear on that B flat. But, you know, you can always go back in and find, I'm sure there's a way of keeping them there. Also, I think for me, and we'll see this in a comparison video at some point, but this piano is bright, and it naturally keeps quite bright settings. So for me, maybe because I just hammer things a bit hard, I would probably change the dynamic range. Let's try a couple other ones. What else? We've got the dry rock piano. It does sound great if you hammer it out. It's got a very good top volume. Let's choose one more for good luck before we move on to other things. Do you know what? When I first started playing on this jazz patch, I was like, doesn't do it for me. But actually, it does sound like you're in a room with a pianist playing. Apart from the mono sound of it all. Pan that around with a stereo panner. This could work well for soundtracky sort of stuff where, you know, you're seeing a pianist on stage or on film. Quite bright still, but that's all right. Let me go back to my own preset. Loading, 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 loading. I prefer that already, but that's maybe just what I'm used to from other sample libraries. And one more thing to say about the velocity layers, you do, and the number of repetitions, the number of round robins they have for each key, it does feel very real. I played, sadly, fewer real pianos now than I do VST pianos, but it really does, especially on these softer ones. It's fun to play, there's no doubt. I have to admit that I wasn't immediately wowed. Like, I've seen some of the demos of this and gone, wow, I can really notice the difference. I'll try and link in, as there was one great video of some guy going through loads and loads and loads of different versions of the VST version, going through loads of different piano VSTs in a row, playing the same melody, having the same melody run through it. And you get to the end and it goes in price order, because there's no doubting Vienna Imperial is not cheap. I will note that I definitely got it on a sale, and even then it's not cheap. But it's, you listen to it at the end, you go, okay, I understand why it is as expensive as it is. Now, I have heard other piano libraries that I've been tempted by as well, which aren't necessarily in that. There's the Garrison Yamaha piano, which sounds interesting, and I think that will be something to pine after at some point. And I will say the guys at Vienna have been really kind about this, actually, because I think in general, like, if you're not happy with a product, they will help you out in getting, like, it's not like other software. Once you've downloaded it, you can't go back. The thing with the Vienna is you have to use their dongle, which actually could be an off-putting thing for some people, but you have to use their Synchrosoft, it used to be, but the Steinberg Elicensor, and they can just take the license, or, you know, make that license invalid so it doesn't work anymore, so they can control it that way. One thing I have to point out about these stupid Elicensors, this is the state of mine right now. You can see that. Might have to do it on this camera. There we go. That used to have a plastic casing, as did the other two beforehand, but the plastic casing is made terribly, Steinberg. And I'm sad that I'm still having to do this. This is just, you know, for mild use of putting it in my backpack to use on my laptop when I'm on the go, and then putting back on my iMac Pro on the way back. And it didn't take long before the plastic casing came off. So that's annoying. Anyway, that will do for my Vienna Imperial video for now. I hope that's interesting to people who have been interested in the product. I haven't seen anyone necessarily go through it in a way that's not just showing off their piano skills yet. So I hope this is useful to people who wanted to know a bit more about the software. Thank you very much for watching, and there'll be a comparison video with this and other pianos soon.